listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix, or way outside the Matrix, you decide. It is time for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. Now, if I'm correct, Rod, our interpretive producer, is on the line. Rod, we are co-hostless today, correct?
No. We had a second hour.
Wait, what do we have in the second? What's going on there?
Kerry Smith.
Oh, Kerry Smith. Great. Okay, that's perfect. Because here's what the show is. Rod has put together a great show. In the first hour, our friend Tyler Nixon will be joining us. He is a conservative, I would say a libertarian conservative. What would you say Tyler is? We can ask him, but Rod, how would you classify Tyler Nixon? You've talked to Tyler enough.
I would consider him more of a libertarian. Yeah, I would consider him more of a libertarian. I think the conservatives are giving conservatives a bad name right now.
No, I agreed. Yeah, well, maybe we'll ask Tyler that when he's on. Then in the second hour, from the left, our friend Ted Rall, who's hopefully feeling a little better out in New York, and he will be on with Kerry Smith. And you know what? We have a nice setup for Kerry Smith on the co-host today on Unsafe Wednesday. What is it, tomorrow we don't have a co-host?
No co-host tomorrow. Okay,
see, I knew there was one day we didn't have a co-host because we've been having Carmine Sabia on Mondays, we had Jason Goodman on Tuesdays. Then today we got Kerry. Last week we had Carter from Unsafe Space. And then on Friday, of course, it's Frosty Fridays. And we'll have to talk to him about, because the Fed met today, not just here, but also in Canada. And so we'll get into that a little deeper on Friday, I'm sure, with Mark Frost. But a great show today, and taking your calls, 202-521-1320. It's The Backstory. Now, let me explain what I mean when I said, Rod, briefly there, we'll have a nice setup for Kerry. You know, one thing I wanted to talk about, we'll keep things nice and non-controversial today on The Backstory, is race and identity politics. Does that sound safe?
Very safe.
Now, because there's a few things about it that I don't hear people say too often and that actually baffle me. I think that people, and I'm going to give one example of this, but let me just say this broadly. The issues of race and identity politics touch so many issues, not just people go look at, and they look at like critical race theory being taught in schools and stuff like that, right? But so many issues, including foreign policy. Part of what's going on with this Ukraine situation, and that's what I'll call it, has to do with race and identity politics. I mentioned this real briefly yesterday, and I've talked about this a number of times on the show. Part of the problem between some of the Ukrainians, the people in right sector, Pravi sector, or the Svoboda Party, the people I refer to some often as Ukrainian Nazis, that's because they have a view on race that Russians aren't pure Slavic enough. You follow me? And I view that as a form of identity politics. You see what I'm saying? You know, and Vladimir Putin has said that he sees part of what's going on in eastern Ukraine there, in the Donbass, as ethnic cleansing. And he's been criticized. Let me talk about this guy for a second. There's this guy, Julian Barnes. Julian Barnes is a writer for the New York Times. And he wrote a big BS piece the New York Times was promoting yesterday. And it occurred to me that I was trying to think, because a lot of people have said that the run-up to war we're witnessing right now, Rod, kind of reminds them of the run-up to war with Iraq. Remember that? Back in the early 90s. Remember that? Rod, were you paying attention to politics at that point? you remember the run-up to the Iraq War?
I think
Rod?
taking a break.
Okay, here now?
On.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I do remember. I wasn't paying attention to it as closely, but I do remember the hype around it. Obviously, the internet wasn't as big as it is now, so you were just paying attention to the newspapers, newscasters, and your cable networks. And
when Colin Powell would go on and talk about Iraqi WMDs, we just watched it on CNN or whatever, and that was it. But part of the thing about social media is we also weren't talking about it with an audience of millions of strangers, people all around the world. And we're doing that now. So I was trying to think to myself, because a lot of people are saying this reminds them of the run-up to the Iraqi war. And I was around at the time. I was living in Austin, Texas. We went out to protest the Iraqi war. I went out with my future ex-wife and our kids. Shane, I think, was there, the former co-host of Fault Lines here on Rita Sputnik. But I know my younger kids were there. Jack was there for sure, and because I took photos. And it does remind me. So I was thinking to myself, what is the equivalent of Iraqi WMDs in this case? Because when we look back now, everybody knows the Iraqi WMDs were a load of hooey. You know what I'm saying, Rod? Everybody looking back goes, oh, Iraqi WMDs, chuckle, chuckle. Everyone fell for that one. But at the time, everyone did fall for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you on that. And I would say my argument would be the whole buildup on the border. And I think it's almost like the weapons of mass destruction. They won't show it to you, and they never will.
Well, I'll tell you what I think it is in this case. It's not because the border thing is, I see what you're saying, and I think that's true in some senses. But I'm going to argue it's the phrase Iraqi WMDs. The current comparison is Russian disinformation. Because this is a big part of their information battle right now. And that's a lot of what this is an information battle. Russian disinformation is the new Iraqi WMDs. In other words, they're making, I'll put it like this, and I can name you 3 or 4 cases, specific ones from Russiagate, for instance. When people would say things about Russiagate, it was disparaged as Russian disinformation. When the Hunter Biden laptop story came out, remember what happened? It was called Russian disinformation. Now, let's take the Hunter Biden laptop story. Obviously, it was obvious then, but more and more people seem to realize now that that was not Russian disinformation. In fact, someone had Hunter Biden's laptop, and there were mails on it that showed things that were shocking and should have been shocking to more people, such as Joe Biden getting kickbacks from Hunter Biden's business dealings. And we confirmed that the best way possible, which is somebody looked at who else was CC'd on the emails, and they found this guy, Tony Bobulinski, and they contacted him and said, hey, did you get these emails? And he said, yes. Not only did he say yes, he went on record and did a press conference, but that didn't matter. It was Russian disinfo. So this guy, Julian Barnes, over at the New York Times, did another one of the stories about Russian disinformation. And they keep doing these stories. Remember, we talked last week about this new government report about Sputnik and RT being Russian disinformation. And I pointed out that one of the things they called Russian disinformation was the claim, and again, this does relate to race and identity politics. You'll see it comes back. Don't worry, everyone. But one of the things they said was Russian disinformation was the idea that there's a neo-Nazi influence in Ukraine. And that is a form of gaslighting, especially for me. How many times have I said there's neo-Nazi influence in Ukraine? A ton, right? I say that all the time. 202-521-1320. Sharif, I see. I'll get to you in 1 second. But you know what I'm saying, Rod? We've said that over and over and over again, and we've had guests who say it. So if that's inaccurate, I want to correct it. The same way when I inaccurately yesterday, and thanks again to our multifaceted engineer Saul for pointing out, I was saying on the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus performance, it was John Lennon, Mitch Mitchell, Eric Clapton, and I kept saying Keith Moon, but it was really Keith Richards on bass from the Rolling Stones playing bass. Keith Moon was in The Who were also on that special. But here's what a stickler I am. I felt guilty about that. I don't even like to get rock stars from the 60s wrong. So if there was not a neo-Nazi influence in Ukraine, but I'd said it over and over and allowed guests to say it over and over, I would come on here and correct it. Period. The end. That's what I would do. Because I will tell you, and people can think whatever they want, but I've proven this throughout my career. I'll say something that, again, and I love working at Sputnik, but my career as a journalist is more important than my job. And I'll say that again. I love working here, but my career is more important than this job. And one of the reasons I say this is the best job I've ever had in journalism is I've had no pressure to lie ever on this show at all. And I've proven this back when I was writing for HuffPost, and Marcos from Daily Cause called my video, this is 2007, the best political comedy video of the year. I think he called it the best political video of the year. All of my audience was HuffPost and Daily Cause readers. It was all on the left. But I told the truth about the John Edwards story because my career was worth more than writing for HuffPost or making friends at Daily Cause. And by the way, at the time, I'm going to point this out. Anybody can look this up. It's weird. It seems like a lifetime ago. But back in 2007, I not only had a big Democratic audience, but a big establishment Democratic audience. Time and Newsweek, and this sounds like I'm making it up, Time, Newsweek, and the Rolling Stone were hailing my comedic genius, and they used that word. The word genius was used to describe me. And that could have saved my marriage if that had come up more, Rob. You see what I'm saying? I'm just saying that I had that, and then I started working with Andrew Breitbart to tell the truth about Pigford, and I threw away that entire audience. All of my income, my entire audience were Democrats, but telling the truth was more important than me. Then, when I was at Breitbart, and they wouldn't let me ask questions about CrowdStrike at the White House, and wanted me to stop asking questions to the White House, I said, my career as a journalist is more important than this job, which was lead investigative reporter at Breitbart. And so I left, and I did not have this job at Sputnik. I was not doing anything at Sputnik. And so I left that job. I made a leap into the unknown. And I'll say again, I'm not going to lie to you as my audience, and I've proven this over and over. I'd rather quit than lie. And like I say, one of the reasons I love working at Sputnik is there's been no pressure to lie. So if I found out that I even accidentally had gotten wrong, that there's a neo-Nazi influence in Ukraine, and that was just, I'd fallen for guests from like Mark Sloboda, right? Like, who said that? Or guests like Alex Mercouris over and over. But you know what? I've looked into it, and I've seen video, and I've heard people talk about it. There's a neo-Nazi influence in Ukraine, period. I'll tell you who's done some good work on it, and they don't take it quite far enough, and they're not honest enough for me. But Vice News, if you go to YouTube, they've done a lot of stuff talking about right sector. Anybody can look up who right sector is. Anybody can look up who Stefan Bandera is. And that Stefan Bandera is celebrated every January 1st with the Tiki Torch March in Ukraine. And this is a guy who collaborated with the Nazis and later had a falling out with them because the German Nazis and the Ukrainian Nazis, see, the German Nazis think they're better than the Ukrainian Nazis. So when the Ukrainian Nazis are talking about Slavic purity, the Germans are kind of laughing into their sleeve, if that makes sense. But a lot of that really relates to identity politics, because who is more identity politics than Hitler, right? When you're pushing for, you know, Aryan supremacy, that's identity politics. You may think to yourself, well, Al Sharpton or whoever, and sure, you'd be correct in a sense, but I don't see it as a difference. And I'll tell you where we had this, then I'll get to you, Tarif. On the show recently, we had the great Carmen Sabia on the show Monday, and we also have Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro on the show. And there was one statement, I don't remember what it was, but Carmine said something, and he basically said, well, and you think this, and you should know because you're Jewish. And Yaakov stopped him because Yaakov fights against identity politics at every turn. And he said, no, I don't believe that because I'm Jewish. He said, being Jewish just means I believe that God gave certain commandments to people, perform mitzvahs and so on. And that's what being Jewish means. And he's right. That is what being Jewish means. It does not mean that you vote Democratic or that you vote Republican or anything. I'm an individualist. And the people who espouse identity politics have an odd contradiction. That's one thing I want to talk about. Then you see what I'm saying, Rod? This is a great topic to talk to Kerry Smith about, because on Safe Space, they deal with unsafe topics like this all the time, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. And I actually was watching Glenn Laurie and a professor from University of Penn, Amy Wax, who they're trying to, she's tenured, but they're trying to kick her out somehow. And she's Jewish, and she spoke on how she believes the Jewish people are betraying America. That's a whole nother subject, but that just goes along with what you're talking about.
And I'll tell you where I hear it a lot. Kamala Harris, I see people on the left accuse her of betraying her race. She's not black enough. She's plenty black. That's a stupid racist argument. Saying Kamala Harris is not acting black enough is a racist argument. It implies that there's a way you have to act and think if you're black, and that is racist. Period. That's racist. So I'm very critical of that. And where it came up today, of course, is the big headline today as we go into today's show, is that Stephen Breyer, Supreme Court Justice, has announced he's going to be retiring. Actually, he hasn't announced it yet. Chuck Schumer announced he's going to be retiring. Breyer's not yet announced it. And so Joe Biden immediately came out and committed that he's going to nominate a black woman. And that is racist. And by the way, that says nothing. If you want to nominate someone who cares about black issues, and there are some issues that affect African Americans differently than they affect, you know, Hispanic Americans or European Americans or whatever. I grant that. There are some issues that affect communities differently. However, your opinion on those issues is not predetermined by your race. Joe Biden, if he came out and he said, I want someone who's pro-black and pro-women, that could be a white dude. You see what I'm saying, Rod?
Right.
Saying, by the way, do you know who knows this is women? Some of the most vicious people towards women, ask any woman, they'll all tell you this, are women, right? You've heard that from women, right?
I've seen it.
Right, right. And what I'm saying is women know it. So I'm not mansplaining, ladies, so calm down. You know, you're a little, don't be on the rag or anything. I'm just saying. But that's something I'm not going to say to Kerry Smith later. Watch, Rod. I'm a professional. And even if she yells at me, watch, I won't say that. But women, you know, and I'll put it like this. Rod, you know some black people, right?
Just a few, yeah.
So is it a discussion among black people sometimes about other black people?
Of course,
playing
yeah.
the race, and including playing the race card, right?
Oh yeah, it's a joke sometimes. You know, it's well, you got, you know, some people might say, oh, you got away with using that as an excuse for whatever the issue might be.
No, that's right. And so it's going to be a very interesting discussion in the second half, and it will be very interesting because after Tarif Brave's on, I want to hear what Brave has to say. So Tarif, go ahead. What's on your mind? Thanks for waiting, and we'll get to Brave.
Thank you for taking my call. I'm going to do this quickly. First, I'd like to say free drone signs, free dongles, and hashtag no more. I have 7 points to make about the Ukraine situation. Here we go. Been following Pepe Escobar. Of course, you already know that the security agreements that the Russia asked the U.S. for been denied by the U.S. They have reports coming from the Donbass region from the head talking about they get intelligence report that Ukraine is currently ready to attack the Donbass, and they might have NATO commandos with them. In my opinion, they might also have some Azov battalion.
But they've been attacking the Donbass. That's not new for years, right?
Yes. But this, with this, I think they're gonna try to make a breakthrough, probably using heavy armor to break through them. And also, if this happens, because
well, how are they going to break through them? Here's what they're going to have to do. If they want to solve things in eastern Ukraine, they're going to have to murder everybody, because the separatists who are there, they're in Ukraine. They're Ukrainians technically. I'll bet their driver's licenses, if we looked at them, are Ukrainian, right? So what are they going to do? They're going to fall back to Ukraine. They're basically going to have to do what they've talked about doing, which is murdering them, because the people who don't like the way Ukraine's treating them are not just going to fold on that and go, well, if you shell us more, we'll like you more. You see what I'm saying, Tarif?
I see what you're saying, but also I got to add this on. But if it happens, if they go further into Ukraine, further into the Donbass region, and they wind up killing Russian citizens, and then Russia might jump in it. And also...
But what Russian citizens? There's no Russian citizens there. What Russian citizens are you talking about?
No.
That's not... If they go into Russian territory, then they've invaded Russia. But these breakaway republics, they're called, they're in Ukraine.
Well,
you see what I'm saying?
I'm sorry, I read it wrong. But anyway, if they go in there, if they break through by using heavy armor, trying to break the defense lines to capture Donbass by using heavy armor with Azov.
But I'm sorry to stop you again, but I don't know what capture means. It's Ukrainians. It's Ukraine. Those breakaway republics are part of Ukraine. So if they capture them, what are they going to do? Move Ukraine to Ukraine? I just don't get it. I don't know what the word capture means. If they
try to retake Donbass region.
What does retake? Retake from who? The people who live there?
Yes. They consider them.
How are they? They haven't lost it. The people who live there. I don't understand the word retake, Tarif. That's what I'm lost on.
What I'm saying is they're going to try to surround them. They're going to try to, destroy the Donbass Republic, People's Republic, and try to bring it back into the fold of Ukraine. But once that happens, and the Ukrainians that's in the east need help, then you might see Russia might help them in doing certain type of tactics, not through an invasion, maybe using long-range artillery, they're trying in warfare. Maybe it's something else. They might cut off gas to Germany or something like that. Or they might send planes to...
Tarif, I got to go because we only got a couple minutes left. I want to make sure we get to Brave. Great call. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just don't... This whole thing in eastern Ukraine, the reporting on it is so screwed up. I don't think people know what the hell they're talking about sometimes. These breakaway republics are part of Ukraine still. They're not recognized. Even Russia does not recognize them. In fact, Russia's being criticized for having a bill in the Duma that might recognize them. But so far, even Russia doesn't recognize these breakaway republics. So there's no bringing them back in. 202-521-1320, Brave in Atlanta. What is on your mind, sir?
How's it going, man? I've got your conversation about or your opening conversation concerning the media and the reporting, especially the reporting on Russia. It brings to mind a conversation I'm constantly having over the Smith Month Act and the continuous degrading of the media since then. I would go so far as to say that we don't really have, when it comes to corporate media, commercial media, we don't really have journalists or real media. We have just another arm of the government. No matter which party is in power at that time, we just have another arm of the government. Which this is not anything perfect that I'm saying right now. Most people feel that way. I guess my question is, most times when I hear independent media or third party media or whatever, or new media, whatever you want to classify it as, when they're reporting or they're covering, like journalists like CNN and things of that nature, they seem to give it what I can only call a objective take, as if these people aren't openly just spreading propaganda, aren't openly lying. Because to me, it's not a matter of being incompetent at their jobs. Anyone that, if I make YouTube videos, if I want to make a video on Russia, I would quickly go and do some research. They have whole production staffs, and they're getting it wrong. It tells me they're not getting it wrong. They're purposely spreading misinformation and then attacking independent media and people in their so-called basements for being misinformation when actually they're spreading correct information or better sourced information. So I guess my question is it that independent journalists are trying to remain objective when not putting the screws to CNN coverage and things of that nature and saying that they're just incompetent or they may be messing it up? Or is it a thing whereas, in your opinion, independent media just wants to wants to seem more official? You know, you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? They want to seem more official, so they don't want to seem like they don't want to seem like the conspiracy theorists or whatever the case is, and say that.
Well, let me say this. I think I hinted before when I used to be the lead investigative reporter at Breitbart News, which is, new media, independent media, right? That's a good example of that, right, Brave? I'm not saying you like it, but I'm saying Breitbart's a good example of new media, right? They built a big media platform without having TV antennas or whatever, or printing presses. And
I'd agree with
I can tell you for a fact, having worked there, that was part of what they were absolutely afraid of, and it held back my reporting. I pointed out about 20 instances where they censored or killed stories of mine. And in a lot of cases, they wanted to fit into the mainstream media. And people like to think, oh, Breitbart is flipping the bird to the mainstream media. No, they weren't. They were specifically, they didn't want to cover certain stories because they were trying to get a press pass for Capitol Hill. So I get it in a sense. You follow me? In other words, it's nice. When I used to go to the White House, it's nice to be able to cover the White House. But that should be open to any legitimate news organization. Now, the question in the era of new media is what determines a legitimate press organization. And I would say some of that actually is size of audience, for instance. If you're a guy with a blog or a lady with a blog or whatever, and 5 people read it, that's to me not as legit as even outlets I don't like Daily Wire, which right now Ben Shapiro, no relation to Yakov Shapiro, who detests Ben Shapiro, by the way, has like 3 or 4 of the top read stories on Facebook. So he's got a very big audience, even though I don't like him or agree with him. And don't think he's honest. But you raise a very good point, Brave, and call back sometime you didn't do anything wrong. I was yapping on, so we went right to the end here. Coming up right after this, we'll talk about some of these issues with our good friend Tyler Nixon. You're listening to the best damn radio show in the world. It's The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show by any means necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390, in the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. Joining us now, great friend of the show. Always fun to have Tyler Nixon on. Hey Tyler, how you doing?
Lee, good to be with you as always, my friend.
It's good to have you on. So let me ask you, Rod and I were talking about you behind your back earlier in the show, and we were trying to decide what to call you. Conservative or libertarian, Republican, but how would you define yourself? Let's ask you, since you're here. What the hell?
I typically say libertarian conservative, but, I'm also constitutionalist. I would consider myself, on some things, almost a you could call it a voluntarist, but an anarchist in the true definition of it, not the distorted media version. Meaning, I think there's real deep and serious philosophical questions about the legitimacy of any sort of governmental authority that people can get together and simply vote themselves into power over, the entire mass of humanity. If you listen to, ever heard of Larkin Rose? I think he's very, very pointed and has a lot of powerful arguments on this subject. And recommend people check him out, Larkin Rose. I think he calls it the most dangerous superstition, which is really that statism is a religion, if you get down to it. It has all the markers of a religion, and when you take it to the level of Democrats today, it's a cult religion.
No, it seems to me that the Founding Fathers were debating and discussing those exact kind of issues often, and there were different points along the spectrum, from Jefferson to Hamilton, whoever. But that they were actively discussing the proper role of the state in human existence, right? That was one of the big issues they were tossing back and forth, right?
That's correct, yeah. And you have to look at them. They were coming out of the Enlightenment tradition, which began to recognize individual rights and human rights and the individual, not just the state and the larger forces in civilization.
No, that's right. And that leads in, well, it doesn't lead into, but it dovetails into something I was talking about, which is identity politics, this concept with Joe Biden. And it was announced today that Stephen Breyer, of course, you are an attorney, and Stephen Breyer's announced, I don't think you're going to get the Supreme Court nomination, Tyler. I hate to break it to you.
Oh, man. Joe promised it to me so many times, though. I really, I'll be disappointed.
It's not simply your ideology, though. You are not a black woman. And I said this before.
Yeah. I thought Joe it would be like a black lesbian Asian dwarf, that's crippled, would probably be the likely.
The odds being what they are, I'll bet there's a black lesbian Asian crippled dwarf out there who also has a MAGA hat. In other words, you could be all of those things. Does that make sense?
Yes,
the point of
absolutely.
individualism is you could be a whatever, Asian, lesbian, crippled dwarf and still be in favor of smaller government, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, probably more so in some cases because, it's hard to say. I mean, it's a cultural thing, but absolutely. And identity politics, I mean, it's anathema to everything that this nation and the founding was based upon, which is, first of all, justice is blind, or, the treatment by government is blind to your particular identity. It's based on your conduct, your behavior, not your racial makeup, your, wealth or background or anything, really, that we're all treated equally before the law. And also that we're not a balkanized society at each other's throats, because then you can't have consensus. So, this is just...
One of the points that I was kind of stumbling towards in the first half hour is just this idea that if Joe Biden had come out and said, I want a Supreme Court nominee who cares about closing some of the gaps that exist between minority Americans and majority, white Americans, whatever, or want to close some of the gaps between women and men. If he'd said that he's looking for a certain, not even ideology, but, somebody who cares about those issues, let's say, that's fine. But for him to come out and say, I want a black woman, first off, assumes that every black woman thinks exactly the same. And that's inherently racist and sexist. And it's also just dumb. It's just so crude, right? The idea... Do you see what I'm getting at about how crude
I mean, the Democrats are, let's face it, the hard left now can't reverse, I think, the sort of the civil rights and I'd say racial harmony advancements that came out of the 1960s, out of, the essential Martin Luther King Jr. message that, you're judged by your character, by your conduct, not by your skin color or your racial makeup. And they can't reverse that fast enough because they want to kill Whitey. I mean, it just comes down to that. Let's face it. They want retribution. They want to be elevated for reasons that have nothing to do with their merit. And they want to be able to divvy up the entire population, the citizenry, into warring factions at each other's throats, and whether that be promulgated or prompted by government or by agitators, and frankly, I look at I felt as though the country had achieved a point of somewhat racial blindness in a sense, and there was harmony. There wasn't this like underlying constant resort to race as either a cudgel or an issue amongst people. I mean, yes, racism still exists, but amongst people of goodwill who didn't think about race, they didn't have to have it shoved in their faces all the time, nor used to segment them or ascribe motives and guilt to them, for lack of a better term, that didn't apply. And I think when Obama came into office and the race card had to be used to basically give him immunity from being held accountable for his, disgusting fascist / communist, varyingly agenda, and his just fecklessness, his deceit, his manipulation. The race card had to be used to cover that, and so unfortunately, I think you come out of his presidency having just exacerbated race, and once they saw they could use it to the extent they have, you saw the rise of Black Lives Matter, and you saw suddenly, everybody's got a racial grievance who's not a white male, and it's open season on, quote, white males. And it's just the amount of racialist rhetoric and application of racial identity to anything, to where, they're denying white men COVID treatments. It literally just, this isn't even this isn't a trope. This isn't some sort of anecdote. No, this is happening systematically. How regressed have we become? Progressives, my eye. These are regressives who have brought us to this really terrible state right now.
Well, and let me point out how bad I think it is. I think it's even worse than you're implying, actually, because, and I'll give an example here, and I want everyone to really think about this. Let's say, Tyler, you came on, and I said, okay, Tyler, the topic I want to talk about is whether Donald Trump did enough for white German Americans, because he's German, right? Did he serve the purpose? Did he help out the white Germans as president? Did he do enough for them? Or did he sell out? My guess, Tyler, I don't know this, but I know you well enough to know, you'd wonder what the hell show you were on, and you would not want to talk about it because it's stupid, right?
Well, as a white German of German heritage, I will say, no, I'm kidding. Yeah, absolutely. No, I would never, it's a ridiculous, it's ridiculous. The premises, the number of presumptions behind such a question are so manifold and so specious that it's like, what are you talking about? Who identifies that way by their heritage? And again, that's what I'm saying. It's not even that people think that way. I think people think, they identify with their own racial groups to some extent, and I think there's definitely a grouping by natural, people's natural behaviors, but to have this imposed on you and in such malicious terms as they do, it's disgusting. It's really the lowest form of politics. It's really not what the Nazis did, and it's just they're just the latter day version of it.
And people listening on 105.5 FM, AM 1390 would drive home and say, I don't know what the hell I was listening to. I was listening to the radio, and these white dudes talking about, and they seem to be Republicans, and they were talking about, did Trump do enough for white Germans? Yeah. And is he a sellout to them? They would say, I was like I was listening to Nazi radio.
Oh,
now, on the other hand, Tyler, if this were a liberal show, and I said, let's talk about Kamala Harris for a second. Is she doing enough for the people? Is she legitimately looking out for the interests of black folks enough? That would not be, there would be no shock expressed. Agreed? No one would drive home and tell their wife about it.
What's amazing is she's not even black. She's Indian and Jamaican of heritage, and she's half white, as Obama was. He's like a half African American. And so it's like, okay, well, I'm sorry, which part? He's half evil? Is that what it is? And yeah, you're absolutely right. But they can talk. See, they can talk along those lines because they've framed the debate on their terms. And, let's face it, on our side, we're not going to savage. We would savage someone who's an open racist, as we should. But they've got you thinking that you can't be racist against white people. It's the pretzel logic to quote the Steely Dan song name is incomprehensible to the point of incoherence. It just comes down to beneath and behind the mask, beneath this fraud that they run on everybody, is just their lust for power and control.
And a lot of it is ideological. It does go back. Obama, we know this from footage that Andrew Breitbart exposed right before he passed away, was a big fan of Derek Bell when he was at Harvard Law, and introduced him and talked about his admiration for Derek Bell, one of the founders of critical race theory, critical race theory does not exist in a vacuum. It's part of critical theory in general. Critical theory is the overarching concept to critical race theory.
It's probably epitomized by Howard Zinn's work. You know, revising everything, revising history to suit the ideology.
No, and Zinn was a very good example of this. And a lot of this comes from Herbert Marcuse and Adorno and the guys in the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School recalibrated Marxism to build in culture and to build in other things other than class. Marxism purely was about class definitions. Are you lumpen proletariat, bourgeois, whatever? And that wasn't selling. In other words, Marxism was not catching on, particularly in places they thought it would catch on. Marx thought the first country, you probably know this, to become socialist would be England.
Yeah.
That's what Marx thought.
The Jacobins, I guess, you know, right?
That's right, yes. Go ahead, Tyler.
And you had your also your what do they call the Fabian socialists? You know, the elite intellectuals.
No, that's exactly right. And they were kind of disappointed that Marxism wasn't sweeping the world. So the Frankfurt School came up with this new theory, and it's called cultural Marxism by a lot of people today, although I don't think they ever use that phrase. But it's the idea that things other than class would be used, but it's still Marxism. Does that make sense, Tyler?
No, absolutely. It's balkanizing the population into factions that, you know, so the ruling elites that supposedly don't exist in Marxian ideology can better rule, more easily rule.
And by the way, Marxism is stupid for the same reason. Any collectivist, non-individualist theory is stupid because you know this from growing up down the street from the Bidens. You can be a child of privilege. You can grow up in the most bourgeois upper, it doesn't make any difference. That does not determine your ideology, right?
No, for sure. I mean, look at the billionaire leftists that run around and the wealthy. I mean, let's face it. I think at this point, the Republican Party has become the party of the middle class and working people. You know, the working class, the blue collars, and which wouldn't seem to make sense. But the Democrats have become fascists, essentially. I mean, they're all about the corporate power and wealth.
Yes, and despite his flaws, and I have no problem talking about Donald Trump's flaws, one of the things that people who hate his guts don't seem to understand is that working class people like the billionaire Donald Trump, right? That's part of his appeal.
The blue collar billionaire, because I mean I mean people act like he was born in a privilege, but what he built was far greater than what he was, you know, was privileged with when he started, and he certainly lost fortunes as much as he's gained. He's taken risks. He got out there, and the man has built and added, you know, value and things to the economy, to you know, our society, and you know, they just want to bash him as being. I mean, everything. You know, it's just the most ridiculously petty and seriously like you know, Marxist type arguments of like you know, the illegitimacy of anything he does because he. You know, had that privilege when he was growing up. It's, you know, more what you do. I mean, there's plenty of, like, you look at what Soros is, Alex Soros. I mean, they've lionized this young spoon-fed, you know, gold spoon, whatever, son of a monster. And yet Donald Trump is pilloried, and Donald Trump's done far more in his life to you know, basically build things and out of nothing and to create and to contribute, you know, in any way he could, than an Alex Soros or any of these other, you know, offspring of these fascist/communist multi-millionaire billionaires.
And I'm sure you agree with me because I talked about this a little last week. I have criticism of both Republicans and Democrats, as do you. I've heard you do it. But Democrats are worse. And
Yeah.
This makes Democrats nuts when I say it. But there's something especially ugly and vicious about Democrats. And I'll put it like this. If you want to see turn up your nose, elitist people, don't go to a Trump rally. Go to a college poetry slam night. You know what I'm getting at, Tyler, if I say that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, the Democrats are, what we are on this side has become very populist, and, populist in the truest sense of being on the side of the population, the general population, and the people. And it amazes me that people trying to so hard push for communism, Marxism, that type of these collectivist ideologies, when the populations of nations and the world has exploded and is exponentially larger than it was when these daft theories and philosophies were first put forth. And it's even less, in my opinion, applicable now because of the diversity, the true diversity of the human race across the world. It just amazes me that someone like a Bernie Sanders is calling for one size fits all universal health care, and it's like, dude, have you heard of the internet? Have you heard of the possibilities of the the ability to have so many different choices? And they want to run against that and just create a one size fits all. Not only that, but run by the most corrupt and organization of all, with the worst track record of all types of organizations. I've often said it's like these people like corporations run. The most giant, evil, unaccountable corporation on the planet is the United States government. I mean, you want to talk about if you were to run what we did in the Court of Chancery in Delaware, an analysis of their fiduciary duties and adherence to them, and just the basic adherence to what an organization is formed for and has any accountability to anybody, it would fail and have been literally dechartered, probably 100 years ago, minimally. So it's just laughable. These people are anachronisms, yet and that's why they become so vicious and frankly unhinged and crazy in terms of their ideology. Anything they can do, and it's all attack, it's all destroy, it's all smear, obfuscate. They're never clear. I mean, the only time that you get someone like a Sanders clear about it, it's giveaways. It's just to basically suck people in with boondoggles and frankly pie in the sky utopian nonsense that we just know demonstrably does not work. And we don't even have to look at our own country and look at any other country that's tried it.
And some of the criticisms I have of the healthcare system, and I do have some, and I'll name one specific one in a second, but I think it's where these corporations are trying to act too much like a privatized version of socialized medicine. I'll give you a perfect example. Like, I just signed up for insurance. I'm now going to be insured again on February 1st. But I can only sign up for insurance in the enrollment period, which is 2 or 3 months. Can you name another freaking product? I'll put it like this. If I want to buy any other product, I don't have to. You can only buy your laptop March to April, right? Stuff like that.
Yeah. It's insane.
It's like a bureaucracy, like a government bureaucracy, where you're supposed to suck it up and not question it, right?
Yeah, well, it comes down to, as they've often said, if you think health care is expensive now, just wait until it's free. And basically, this to me, it's like turning your health care over to DMV. It's like, what government entity can you point to that's gotten anything right that has been anything but a corrupt, unaccountable, excessive, out-of-control organization that's arbitrary, dictatorial, capricious, and you're going to turn over your personal healthcare decisions to the equivalent of the IRS? This is just lunacy. I mean, these people, I don't know where these people, they seem to think it's this, good man theory, like, oh, if we just get the right people in charge of this giant Leviathan authoritarian entity that rules by fiat and has no accountability, really, in any direct sense, it's somehow going to, if you get the right people in charge, they'll make the right decisions and they'll do right by everybody. Well, inherently, that level of power, the people who would seek it out and would wield it, to me, if you want to and are willing to wield that level of power, you're inherently corrupt, period. There's just no way around it. And it's just that this is the essential conceit and the essential contradiction or internal incoherence of statist ideology or authoritarian statist ideology as represented by fascism, communism, and the Democrat Party, excuse me. And look, I mean, it's like our healthcare system has serious problems, but when did it start going wrong? It started going wrong when the government started intervening and created Medicare and Medicaid and started competing in that market with unlimited resources and trying to control it thereby. And now we've got just all these, sort of corporate response, and the way the Corporations Act is to constantly deal with the impositions of government and it just distorts. It separates people from their doctors, and it'll only be that on steroids if we actually turn it over to a one-size-fits-all, no options system, which is just, I mean, it's scary to think about. I mean, like I said, if you want your healthcare run by DMV, there you go. You got it right there. I mean, I don't see, again, they have nothing they can point to that would indicate that they could do any better or would do better than what we have now, as bad as it might be.
Now, Tyler, we only got a couple minutes left, so let's go back to the Supreme Court nomination for a real quick second. Just very quickly, do you think this is going to be a battle, or do you think Biden's going to nominate somebody and they're going to be approved quickly and we'll move on? And it's not going to really change the makeup of the Supreme Court ideologically. It's still going to be a conservative leaning, whatever the hell that means, Supreme Court. Do you think this is going to be a fight, or do you think this is going to be just a snoozer?
I mean, it'll be a fight, a rhetorical fight, and it may be a nomination exposure spectacle, but as long as you have Lindsey Graham, the likes of Lindsey Graham in there, who can't get these Biden appointees on the bench fast enough, and Republicans don't engage in the sort of character assassination follies and vicious craziness that had them occupying the Capitol, frankly, over Kavanaugh, the Republicans don't do that. They don't. That's not the form of politics. Even the squishes would ever engage. In fact, less so. So no, I don't think you're going to have any kind of real fight. You're going to have the best attempt to expose the types of the person that they're nominating. But it's going to be a hard left ideological, black woman, whatever have you. I'm sure. And it's you look at it's unfortunately, this is where I have issues with Republican, the lack of fight, the squishy rolling over. And if we just, Lindsey Graham seems to think, if we just, his theory, if we act in good faith towards these Democrat zealots that are put on the bench, then we won't get any pushback when we put our good faith nominees up. Yeah, wrong, Lindsey. The track record is clear. You're wrong. But like I said, as long as he's there, it'll go through. I think you'll get, depending on how radical the nominee is, you'll get a level of fight from the Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, and those folks. But that's fine. I mean, Breyer was. I don't see how much worse they could be than Stephen Breyer.
Well, and I'll put it like this. Well, let's see if we can get to the heart of the important issues. Do you think with a black woman nominated, and Joe Biden, Jen Psaki already said that's what's going to happen, do you think we're going to go into her history of partying as a teenager at all? Is that anything you're going to let us touch at all?
God knows. I mean, you'll have enough to deal with probably all the crazy ideological fulminations that person put out that they'll then try to disavow, as we've seen with so many of these Justice Department and judicial nominees from the Biden administration. Just, literally were talking about that in racialist terms, in extreme racialist terms, suddenly disavow that as, that was then, this is now, even though it's just, plain in writing and there's no question. And it wasn't like 15 years ago, it was like a year ago. So
let's just hope she didn't like beer, because that would be the big scandal that would expose everything. Tyler Nixon, great appearance as always. Love having Tyler on the show. When we come up, we got Kerry Smith joining us as co-host next hour, and we're taking your calls, 202-521-1320. We continue right after this short break on the best damn talk show in the world. I'm Lee Stranahan, and this is The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are back. It is time for one more hour on a Wednesday, halfway through the week here on the best damn talk show in the world. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. Always great talking to Tyler Nixon. And a very smart guy and very, sincere in his beliefs. And always a great conversation with Tyler. This hour, Carrie Smith from Unsafe Space is joining us on an Unsafe Wednesday. We had Carter Laren, her co-host, last week, and we are blessed to have Carrie Smith with us today for the next hour as co-host. And our guest is going to be from the left, Ted Rall from New York. That's as left as you can get, I think, because there starts to be the Atlantic Ocean after that. We got that and more coming up with Carrie Smith right after this on The Backstory. Hey, Carrie, welcome.
Hi, Lee. How are you?
I'm groovy, thanks. So we're talking, let's continue some of the conversation we've been having throughout the show. And because people, if they don't know your background, you felt like you were trapped in the cult of wokeness for a while, right? Carrie, is that fair to say? I can't hear Carrie, that's all. Saul, can you hear me?
Yeah, Carrie just went on mute.
Okay. Okay, just making sure. Because sometimes when I can't hear anything, it means that I'm the one, my internet's gone out or something like that. So I always like to double check. But anyway, Carrie, are you back? We'll hear from Carrie when she's off mute. That's okay. I've done that. That can happen very, very easily. But Carrie's background is she used to consider herself a woke person and realized it was very cult-like. And I think that has to do, we've talked to Carrie about this a little bit before, partially with the ideological collectivism that Tyler and I were talking about last hour. If you have a belief that does not put individuals at the center of the universe, but individuals are only important in groups, well, I think it's going to have some psychological consequences. And by the way, speaking of psychological consequences, interesting report coming out of Israel today, one thing that's in the headlines, is that the number of cases of anxiety and psychological problems among children has shot up 30%. Anxiety shot up like 34%. Panic attacks is up 30%. And they're attributing this to, because Israel, when it comes to COVID-19, is always praised because you have to get vaccinated like 4 times now or something, or they've allowed it, and they push it. But there is a real dark side, I think, that is not talked about enough. Carrie, tell me when you're back, by the way.
Yeah, her internet's still down. She's getting it back up. But okay. I agree with that, Lee. And you don't have a short-term memory or a long-term memory problem. I was one of the people that was saying, listen, we need to pause and think about this before we try to lock everybody, including kids, down. And obviously the state didn't listen. Talking about the entire United States, and we're seeing the effects of it now.
Yes, and I don't think this study in Israel is going to be an outlier. I think this is going to be typical. And I think what it points out is unintended consequences. In other words, all of the medical things are not going to show up on a chart. Oh, and let me say this too, Rod, and I'm curious what your take on it is. We've had lots of cases where we've seen recently, they say the number of people hospitalized with COVID has shot up. it seems to me that what we've not seen is a corresponding rise in the number of people going to, the ICU or whatever, because there were people who were going to go to the hospital anyway. I'll put it like this. My guess is if you were in the hospital with a broken leg and then they gave you one of those mandatory tests, because the Omicron variant was so spready but not that dangerous, your chances of, and because they were testing a lot more. So if you went in with a broken leg and they tested you, which they would have, you would then be a person in the hospital with COVID. Correct? Am I wrong? Or is that the way they're measuring these things, Rod?
No, you're 100% right. And like I've told you before, before I started here, I was working in the administrative side of medical records and with the federal government, local government, and state governments. And this is exactly what they were doing. Like you were saying, if you break your leg and they test you, you would count as as a COVID hospitalization. And even the term hospitalization, they changed it. Not a lot of people realized it, but usually hospitalization, which means you're inpatient, would be 48 hours or more. But they changed it. Everything became, and still is under the emergency authorization, it's fluid. So if you just enter the hospital, you're considered a hospitalization. Some people are like, no, that's not true, but I'm telling you, that's exactly what they're doing. You get a test, and you're considered a hospitalization, COVID positive patient.
And to me, the reason the Biden administration is putting out all these tests is they want the apparent numbers to go up. They want the number of people they can say have COVID to go up, right? Am I wrong in thinking that's what's going on?
No, I'm with you on that. I believe even the CDC, they're right there with that. They want the numbers to go up. They're trying, again, to pump the fear, to keep their credibility up.
That's right, because and this way, therefore, they can say, since the number of cases, since there's more testing and they're finding more cases of COVID, of this not particularly dangerous strain of COVID. Although, again, I don't want to downplay it in the sense that, again, I've had some people who've gotten COVID, and they've said, and these are people who were skeptical, it's not just a cold. If you actually get COVID and you come down with it, anyone who wants to call in, 202-521-1320, and ever relate your own experience, it seems like it's more serious than just a cold, but you're not ending up in an ICU. And what that means is, with a lessened risk, the idea of, the other thing that happened is the Biden administration has now backed off. They were using OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. OSHA was out there saying, you've got to be vaxxed if you work for any employer that's got over 100 employees. And this was defeated in the Supreme Court. Now that that's happened, the Biden administration came out recently in the past 24 hours and said, well, never mind. We're not gonna push for that anymore. So in other words, they've admitted that was, they wanted to see if they could get away with it. That's what I'm trying to point out, Rod. That's what I think. They were testing the limits. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. And we see now the governor of New York, one judge said, no, you can't have a mask mandate. And then another judge says that it can stay. And so we see that they're like you said, they're just testing and see what they can get away with.
202-521-1320. Let's go to the calls. Ingrid from D.C., what is on your mind?
Well, I want to talk about Victoria Nuland. But first, I just want to say I think you were a little hard on Tarif today. He's always a little disorganized, but I think what he was getting at is that the Ukrainians are going to try to make an assault, and if they were able to break through, they would like to occupy the eastern Ukraine. And if they could, it would be like Sherman's March to the Sea. But the alternative is they're trying to provoke a response that Russia would feel like they had to protect the Russian ethnic.
Well, and that's why, and I wasn't trying to be, Tarif was repeating something I've heard a lot of people say, and you kind of said it too. What do you mean, like, occupy? Who's there now? So let's be clear on that. Right now, in these areas in eastern Ukraine, there are people who live there, right? Who are they? What country are they from?
Don't go all semantic on me. Yes, they are fellow Ukrainians, but they are considered rebels, and it's like the North occupying the South. It's just, you know, don't get hung up on this word or the phrasing.
No, I'm not hung up on a word or phrasing. I want to be very clear. The Ukrainian government is attacking and killing its own citizens. That's what's happening. People, they believe they are their own citizens. And what they want to do is ethnically cleanse the people who they consider a danger, who are the ethnically Russian people in a lot of cases. And they're very clear about this. And the right sector when they're over there. So what I don't want to do, especially on this show, I don't want to give the Ukrainians any benefit of the doubt semantically and allow them to get away with their BS. It's BS. The Ukrainian government, with the assistance of the U.S. and NATO, wants to kill their own people. And they're doing it for ethnic reasons. That's what they're doing. So that's all. It's not semantics if you're dead. The people who are being killed are Ukrainians. That's what I'm trying to be clear about. I don't buy into they're the ones being semantic. By them calling it, by anyone saying, I don't grant the premise they want to retake. Because here's the thing. When people hear retake, it makes it seem like something's been taken from the country of Ukraine. No, it hasn't. People who are ethnically Russian in many cases, but who live in a region that's largely ethnically Russian, were being attacked by the government of Ukraine and killed and shelled. And they didn't like that. That's what's going on. And the Ukrainian government is not being stopped because people in the media get to say stuff like, well, they want to retake, which makes it seem reasonable. What Ukraine is doing is not reasonable. That's my point, Ingrid.
Nobody disagrees with you. But let me go to Victoria Nuland. And what's been bugging me since Sunday is hearing Katrina vanden Heuvel, the editor of The Nation, on C-SPAN and talking about Biden's first year and what's going on in Ukraine. And referring to Victoria Nuland, she was criticizing Biden's hawkish cabinet and such, mischaracterizing Nuland as having served under G.W. Bush and Trump. And she didn't serve under Trump, but totally skipping the most important part, that she was under Obama. And I think this, I have this hard time imagining this is a lapse of memory. I think this is not wanting to draw attention to the fact that it was under Biden's direction and auspices that she fomented the coup in Ukraine in the first place.
Well, that's clear. And by the way, I'll tell you who else she worked under was Strobe Talbot. Victoria Nuland worked under Strobe Talbot. And I'll bet Katrina didn't mention that. Now, look, people make mistakes. Did anyone correct Katrina on this, and what was her response?
Nobody corrected her. And the thing is, I've taken issue with C-SPAN, and I've called them up on this before, and they're very defensive about it. They never correct people. They just let them speak.
And no one called in to ask about Nuland? Or was it not one of those kind of shows?
Somebody called in later and said something about 2014, but it never came to that point, no. Well,
and, Katrina's well-known, high-profile editress, and some people should be able to contact her publicly. Some people with, I'll put it like this, if anyone cared about the truth, they would say, hey, you skipped something. And if she were to come up and say, you know what, for whatever reason, I forgot that I failed to mention that. I should have, of course. Victoria Nuland worked under, she was instrumental in the Euromaidan. And of course, she had a high, by instrumental, I mean high profile. And she's one of the better known people to come out of the Maidan from the Obama administration. Would you agree with that, Ingrid?
She's notorious. You can still Google the video of her and Jeffrey Pyatt planning who is going to take over the government when Yanukovych was ousted. Yats is our guy.
Yes, and that was her F the EU call as well.
Yes.
Great call, Ingrid. Carrie's back, so I'm going to throw it back to Carrie. But great call, Ingrid from D.C. Hey, Carrie, how you doing?
Hi, Lee. Sorry about that internet issue.
Well, I'm not one to ever complain about the internet, considering the South Dakota apartment internet I'm apparently stuck with. I talked to my rental. By the way, Saul, did I tell you that I talked to the office here? Did you hear me say that?
Yeah, you did. You can't have Starlink, right?
I can't have I can't put anything on the roof, which is nutty. And there was no discussion about it because I live in a corporate apartment. It's not like it's owned by some guy and I can talk to Bill and maybe convince him with a case of Bud or something. Nope, nothing's going on the roof. So I'm never one to complain about others' internet. We're just glad you're back, Harry. So we were saying, we were talking to Tyler Nixon last half hour about why the Democrats and the left broadly. I think it's the left broadly. I think they are meaner and less honest. And part of the reason I think that is I think it has to do with their more, and I'm sure this is a discussion you and Carter Laren may have had at some points because I know that Carter's influenced by Ayn Rand. And I know a lot about that world and ideology. Have you and Carter talked about whether the left's general collectivist bent, as opposed to an individualist bent, is responsible for some of the viciousness we see, Carrie?
We haven't exactly talked about the collectivist bent being responsible for it, but I've been thinking more about, I agree with you. I think the left, at least today, is meaner and less honest than the right, and that's my opinion coming from the left. And I heard your previous guest was talking about the Kavanaugh hearings. Those hearings were one of the things that helped to wake me up because I couldn't believe his character was being put on trial based on someone's memory and unsupported allegations from how many years ago. And it took from my side, my quote-unquote side, to be engaging in that. I thought it was disgusting. They made fun of him. I remember when he was showing emotion during the testimony when he talked about his daughter, and that did it for me, was seeing them make fun of his very real emotion. They called it white male tears, and that's mean. That's dishonest. I'm not exactly sure why it is. I'm starting to think lately that it might be that I've started to think that you need some kind of brakes on all the worst things about human nature. Do you think so, Lee? Like your humans' tendency to lie or to cheat or to be the worst part of ourselves. One of the reasons I like Christianity as a belief system is because it gives you a brake system that prevents you from going to those places if you're a sincere believer. And I'm not convinced it has to be Christianity. Maybe it could be another belief system. But the belief system of the left, it doesn't have the right braking mechanism. There's nothing that tells you to put the brakes on and stop disparaging someone's character or stop lying because they believe that the ends justify the means. That's baked.
Well, what I used to say when I first came from the left to the right was that the left has no moral basement. There's no point at which they won't go. And it's funny, you're talking about your story. And by the way, Julie, I'll get to you in 1 second. I see you on the phone line there. Tammy, forgive me. Tammy, don't worry, Julie's not in front of you. Just you, I just said the name wrong. Sorry about that, Tammy. But my friend Andrew Breitbart, the thing that changed him was another Supreme Court hearing. It was the Clarence Thomas hearing. And he felt like when he saw what they were doing to Clarence Thomas with the Anita Hill thing, he had a similar emotional reaction to what you described you having, which is disbelief that how much they would tear somebody apart publicly, right? That's what you're talking about, correct?
Yes. And I think that's why some people are starting to compare the modern left, whatever you want to call this belief system that's gripping the left, if you call it woke or it is collectivist, but some people are starting to compare it to psychopathy. Like, because I think it's similar if you are looking at it, whether you're looking at an individual or a belief system, if you're looking at someone who has no moral basement, as you put it, then there are things that they're capable of as a person or as an ideology that normal people can't even fathom.
Well, and part of what I saw this in 2016, I was doing some research today and I noticed some pictures from 2016. If you're willing to call your opponents without, because I'll use the term Nazi sometimes when describing people in Ukraine who literally worship a guy, Stefan Bandera, who collaborated with the actual Nazis, was responsible through the Ukrainian insurgent army for the vicious murders of Jews, Poles, women, and children. And I've seen it. I've seen the evidence of that. So when I use the term Nazi, I mean it. That's what I'm getting at. I reserve Nazi for Nazis. But to call you just your ideological opponents, if someone's wearing a MAGA hat, to call them a Nazi. The thing about Nazis, you can do anything with them. So if you're judge, jury, and executioner, right, and you believe that your opponents, and this is why I don't even like, and by the way, having big disagreements with communism, I don't like it when people overdo it with that as well. And it's one of the reasons I actually use the word commie sometimes, is I think it's funny. I don't think it's particularly vicious. I think it's funny. And that's why I had a shirt on once that said, "Not today, commie." And John Kiriakou noticed and laughed. And it was good he laughed, because the point of it was, it's funny to me. But do you think that the overplaying, that's part of what the woke people have done, by making their opponents everybody's racist Nazis, then anything is justified because their enemies are supervillains? What do you think, Carrie?
Oh, that's absolutely. And that was part of what woke me up, was seeing that happen after Trump won. Because I had people in my echo chamber, in that social justice echo chamber, who were simultaneously calling all, 63 million Trump voters, they were calling them all Nazis, at the same time that punch a Nazi was becoming a popular phrase. And so on the one hand, they're saying, physical violence against Nazis is something we want to start pushing. And then all of these people, everyone who voted for Trump is a Nazi. That's crazy. That's a level of dishonesty. I mean, I was shocked that there weren't more friends of mine who weren't comfortable with it then. Although now I'm starting to see it's, flash forward a few years and things have gotten to such a level where there are friends of mine who couldn't see it then who can see it now. Like, people have been waking up. I think and I would say also for a lot of people on the left, once they get hit themselves for wrongthink, for going off the beaten path just a little bit, saying, well, I don't know about this war, let's say that becomes a thing. Does that make sense? Yes.
Okay, real quickly, want to go to Tammy, because we're almost at the bottom of the hour. Tammy in D.C., what's on your mind? Thanks for waiting.
Yes, I was calling regarding to the testing, because I had a COVID test. This is my 5th one. Because I had the signs of the symptoms of COVID, sinus infection, but I told my doctor, I know good well I did not have no COVID. And she said, well, just in case, you're going to have to get ready to, what they call that, the antibodies and everything, get you ready for the hospital. I was like, do what you need to do, because I know I won't be going. But long story short, I did have my testing, come back, all 5 of them been negative. So you're right. They was trying to push all this stuff on me. I said, oh, no, good well, I do not have COVID. So that's what I wanted to tell you. Also, I'm a Green Party. They labeled me as a Nazi, too, so I love it.
Yeah, right. Well, and that's why when Jill Stein was attacked, that's what I say. It's very hard. The path of righteousness for the woke is very narrow, and it changes sometimes from week to week, right? Do you agree with me on that, Carrie?
Yeah, it is. They're the new Puritans. Nobody's pure enough. That's funny. I was Green Party briefly when I started leaving the woke left. So I feel you. Yes, everyone is a Nazi except for them.
No, right. And the, you know, when the COVID thing started, it was really, you couldn't tell necessarily what was the woke position on that going to be. And we've seen different ones. We've seen Black Lives Matter in New York protest against stuff. So it's also, that's the other problem, is if you step out of line, you're a Nazi, but it's hard to know what's going to make you step out of line. Right, Carrie?
Yeah, it's hard to know. And they have problems with, I didn't know that Black Lives Matter in New York had been protesting, but I'm glad to hear that. They have different leadership there. That guy's a free thinker. What's his name? Hank Newsom? But that guy steps out of line all the time.
Yeah. And on some things, but on other things, we talked about this. We're talking to Daniel McAdams, but I don't think I came up with him. Who were we talking to? It was Mark Frost. He was saying that the candidate for the Libertarian Party came out in favor of Black Lives Matter, for instance. And that was one of the things that made him jump ship on the Libertarian Party. So ponder that. And I agree with that one, not just because of my position on Black Lives Matter, but because anybody who could come out in favor of that doesn't get it enough to be the Libertarian candidate for president. Yeah. You don't understand ideology enough to understand it. And by the way, there's plenty of people, I would argue Trump doesn't understand ideology well enough for my good. So let's take a short break, Carrie. When we come back, our friend Ted Rall, cartoonist, author, bon vivant, who's recently had a tough case of COVID himself. We'll talk to Ted in just a second here on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want to record us.
Talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back on the backstory. 105.5 FM, AM, 1390 in Washington, D.C. We are joined as guest hosts today by the great Carrie Smith from Unsafe Space. And Carrie, where's the best place people can find this? The website is still the best place right now, correct?
Yes, we're still at unsafespace.com.
There we go. And that's the place to find. How many podcasts are you guys doing over there now? Explain what the lineup is over there.
Oh, we have a couple different series. Yeah, we have a guy named Comics Division who does a series on the Great Reset. He's called Comics Division because his own channel is about comic books and pop culture and social justice ideology and pop culture. So we do the Great Reset series with him. We have our book club that we do. Carter's doing a show called Dangerous Thoughts, which is more about deep dives into philosophy. But there's a couple different programs. There's something for everyone, a little bit.
There we go. Now joining us, speaking of comics, cartoon artist, author, writer, bon vivant, the great Ted Rall, straight out of Manhattan. Hey, Ted, how you doing today? Literally, how are you doing? Are you feeling better?
It's a smidge, but it's a very, very slow road back.
And it's simple. So you now let me ask you this. Were you tested first or symptomatic first? In other words, were you sick and then you went and had yourself tested, or vice versa?
Yeah, the former. I was sick. I came on insanely fast, so I got tested, and it was a home test. And you know how they say wait 15 minutes? In my case, like 30 seconds was enough. It was just like as bright red as possible. I feel like I probably stole some COVID from someone else. I had so much COVID.
Right. So
that's how mine was.
Wait, so when did you have COVID, Carrie?
I had it in September, and same thing. I did an at-home test, and it was really rapid. So there was no waiting. There was no question. Plus, I lost my sense of taste and smell. Did you do that?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't as severe as other people seem to report, but it was kind of like cut in half, maybe.
Well, and I had a scare where I lost my sense of smell, and I am confident enough in my masculinity to admit that I like candles, and I invest in them. And what I mean by invest in them is the smelliest candles, the ones with the strongest scent, in my experience, are the Yankee Candles from Yankee Candle Company. And I like, and as I say, it's not like when I say I'm confident in my masculinity, I've got all the gunpowder smelling candles, although I do have one. But the candles I have, like Christmas cookies, one of my favorite flavors, smells, scents, whatever you call it. And I also use tea tree shampoo, partially because I like the smell, and minty shave cream. So I like smells. And I was in the shower, and one day I had this shampoo that I bought accidentally that I didn't like. It was like Jacaranda or something like that. And the smell made my nose curl up. And one day I was taking a shower, and it didn't bother me. And so I suddenly grabbed something else and started to smell it. And then I went in where my candles are, and I grabbed a raw unlit candle and started, because you can smell it without lighting them. And I'd lost my sense of smell. And I was kind of freaked out for a second because I don't want to get COVID. And I didn't like the fact that I'd lost my sense of smell. But it came back after about 4 or 5 days and just on its own, doing nothing. And I didn't seem to have COVID. So, Carrie, how long did you lose your sense of smell for? And were you freaked out like I was? Make me feel better.
I was. Yeah, I was. Well, I was very freaked out because also that's my best sense out of all my senses. So I felt very blind. But I lost it completely for maybe a month, and now, what is it? It's January. I still don't have it 100% back. I'd say it's maybe 75% back. So it's weird because I've heard everybody has obviously different symptoms with COVID, which I think is one of the strangest things about this virus is how it affects everyone differently. But with me, with the sense of smell, there are certain smells I still can't smell at all, like bleach, which is kind of concerning. But then other things that I can now smell again, like lavender, which is great. I love lavender.
Now, so Ted, I don't remember. I'm sure you said, but Ted, are you still smelly?
I'm back to full smell, but that's not really a good thing when you live in Manhattan and you ride the subway. I kind of viewed it as a blessing. I get why people who live in places, with flowers and fresh air would be freaked out. But for me, I was like, well, that aspect of COVID was working for me.
Well, see, for me, part of it was I felt this is a problem with being, having some Scottish blood in me, so I'm a cheap bastard. But I felt bad because I just spent like $30 on candles. And I was like, oh, come on, if I'm going to lose my smell, shouldn't it be before I buy candles? So there we go. Because some of these candles, they are expensive. The good ones are expensive.
Oh, yeah.
That's one thing I've learned.
Yeah.
The cheap ones, you can get them, but at that point, you might as well have a sparkler at your house or something like that. I don't know. So Ted, Carrie and I, before you came on, we were talking, and Ted, I said this, and I don't say it with any, but you're a commie, right? You consider yourself a communist?
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, let me point out something, Carrie, because this also goes to what I was saying about individuals versus collectivism. It's not that commies are all nasty jerks. Because Ted Rall, perfect example. But I think let me give you an alternate theory.
I have to say sarcasm goes over my head sometimes. Are you also being funny? Are you really a comic?
I'm not trying to be. I'm actually trying to make a serious point, which is somebody's ideology does not determine to me whether they're an a-hole or not. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Oh, I agree. I agree completely.
Of course. No question.
And I think some of the stuff we're seeing, because Carrie and I were talking about the nastiness we see sometimes in politics from people on the left and how shocking it was to Carrie at one point, and I've had it too. So my alternate theory on this is some people are just jerks. There we go. And whatever ideology they got into, they'd be jerks for that ideology.
But no doubt. Although I'm just going to say personally, I think there's probably moderate centrists. Swing voters are probably the jerkiest of them all.
Now,
are you being serious or sarcastic?
Both. I think it's true, okay. but it's completely unfounded, so therefore I'm being sarcastic. I have no research to back this up.
But you're apparently speaking from personal experience, which is good enough. This is not a test. By the way, did you guys hear, speaking of tests, the SATs no longer going to be done with a pencil? So put your number 2 pencil down. That's the thing of the past. That's old school. They're just doing it electronically. Did you guys hear that?
At 58 years old, this comes as a great relief to me that I'm not going to have to go in on a Saturday, extra day of school. I had heard that, and it makes sense. It's the way of the future. I can imagine that it'll probably make cheating easier, but whatever, not my problem. Let the College Board deal with it.
Well, and also the SATs, the test is moving from 3 hours to 2 hours. And I'm weird because I took my SATs when I was 15 because I went to college early. And I thought it was easy. And it's not like I aced it or anything, but I did well enough where I could leave high school and go to college. Really, they weren't looking for straight 8s or anything. They were just, are you so dumb we can't let you into Simon's Rock early college? And I was not apparently that dumb. But there's no sign of me. I was looking at the Simon's Rock website the other day because something about the Cohn brothers. Both Joel and Ethan Cohn went to Simon's Rock early college, part of Bard College in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, about 10 years because they're older than before I did. And I just checked. I was on the Bard website for Simon's Rock, and I said, let's just see if I, because they list famous alumni. I'm apparently not a famous alumni. So that's to no one's shock. But anyway, Ted, what's your personal experience why you think center people are the jerkiest?
They don't believe in anything, right? So they get really upset at those of us who do. I have found that it's a lot easier as a lefty for me to get along with people on the far right than people in the middle. Obviously, I tend to be comfortable with people on the far left too. But people in the middle, they kind of know that they don't have any conscience or really care about the future of anything. So since they don't believe in anything, they're insecure. And those of us who have beliefs make them uncomfortable just by existing. And so, they act out and they get like all aggressive and, passive aggressive, aggressive aggressive. I've just had bad experiences with them. They get angry and you're like, it's kind of like that, being, Lee, you're recently divorced. You know what I mean? It's like, how someone can have a fight with you and you haven't even felt like you were invited to the fight? That's kind of like how centrists are.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm not only going through, I'm still not divorced, Ted. I know it seems, I've been talking about it for over 2 years, but here I am. I'm still not divorced. And
it takes time. This is America. It takes time.
It is. And my future ex-wife, I think, does not want to have an accounting. Here's what it is. She doesn't work. And we have bills, including my hospital bills. So when this gets settled, she's going to end up with, my guess is, about $30,000 in bills she's owing. Not a huge amount, but if you don't work, that's a huge amount, right? Sure. So my guess is that right now, today, even though she technically has $30,000 in bills, she's not on the hook for them legally at all. Does that make sense?
You don't have to pay those medical bills. You know that, right? You can just blow those off. They don't go on your credit. Nothing happens. You can just write to them and say, you know what? I don't want to pay you because I'm a bad person. Bye. And there's nothing they can do.
Well, my future ex-wife will be happy to hear that. But her lawyer sent me about some other medical bills today. So, but that's good advice, Ted. But Carrie, does Ted's experience comport with yours at all? The people who don't believe in anything can be jerkier?
Well, I believe nihilists can be jerks, yeah. But I think your definition of people in the center is interesting because that's not how I've really thought of people in the center, as not believing in anything. I guess it depends on who you're talking about. Because I tend to think of, like now, I get called, since I left the social justice part of the left, some people call me a classical liberal, other people call me a conservative. I mean, I get called Nazi and all that stuff too. But I guess more often than not, I get called a centrist because I have a mix of it. Like some of my opinions would be put in the left category and some would be put in the right category. It just depends on the issue. So no. Now, let's have an argument.
Now, no, that's good. Great answer, Carrie. So Ted, let me ask you this. What's your opinion? Now, and I'm going to make a slight differentiation here between what I'll call a woke ideology, the ideas of whatever the woke movement is, and the woke movement itself writ large. What do you think of the woke? Forget the ideology for a second. What do you think of the woke? What do you think of the appearance of the term even? Some people I know don't even like the term. They don't want to hear the term woke at all. What do you think of, I'm going to use the W word, the woke movement, Ted?
Woke 1.0, I was a huge fan. You know, it was just basically the idea that people were aware of the fact that there was a class and racial and gender and other structures in society that that relied upon systemic oppression, and that it was important to be aware of those things. Big fan of those things. But what woke 2.0 or 3.0, wherever we're at now, seems to mean is we're back to late 1980s, early 1990s style, linguistically obsessed political correctness, which is much more about monitoring people's language than it is about improving their personal conditions. You know, I think, you know, I'm a white cis male, you know, so stipulated, but I dare say that I think like most black people care more about, you know, living in safe neighborhoods, being paid equally, having equal opportunities, equal educational opportunities, not being screwed over by the police when they're pulled over at 2 o'clock in the morning, than they care about being addressed with just the right adjective or whatever. I think, you know, the sort of fake left's, the social justice left's emphasis on language to the exclusion of class issues and the way that society is organized, I think is a problem. It's a distraction. And it doesn't mean that that language isn't important. It's incredibly important. You know, the words we use mean a lot, but if that's all we're talking about, it's a serious problem.
Now, Carrie, do you think that Ted is underestimating the traumatic value of Aunt Jemima when he's talking about this?
Definitely. Well, woke 2.0, I never heard it called that before, but that's true. Woke 2.0 would say yes. You are vastly underestimating the trauma that these characters on products cause. Woke 2.0 has gone so far that it's circled back to be, it's that horseshoe theory or whatever. It's so racist now, in my opinion. It's so sexist that if you look at the Land of Lakes, you mentioned Aunt Jemima, but look at the Land of Lakes girl. Like, they disappeared her off the box, but they kept all her land. Like, how racist is that? You took the Indian lady off, and now it's just this creepy bit of land there. Like,
right. I saw a guy on Twitter named.
It's what happened to the Native. It's like what happened to the Native Americans in the first place. Bump.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
we
no,
took their
yeah.
land.
Now
That's
the only
exactly
people left on cereal boxes are white people. That's the only people left.
I saw that joke from a guy on Twitter named Lakota Man. Lakota are the Indians, a lot of Lakota in South Dakota here. And I thought it was such a good joke that I retweeted it immediately. I don't even care about the ideology. That's a good joke. And he showed a picture of the box.
Yeah.
And he said, just like they did with the Native Americans, she's gone, but the land, they kept the land. So, yeah, I agree with that. Now, let me ask you both, and Ted, I'll have you go first, and Carrie. Let me ascribe this to something else, because you call it 1.0. I think it's a certain, I'll tell you the problem is freshmen. Let me explain. What I'm reminded of with this woke 2.0 moment is people who are like freshman philosophy, psych, or poli-sci majors they're learning ideas for the first time, and those people, freshmen, sociology, psychology, any of those disciplines, liberal arts disciplines, because Simon's Rock's is a liberal college, they're especially vicious because they're clueless. They're literally just learning the terminology, and they think they know everything. So does that make sense, Ted, that there's a certain freshman element to this posery?
Well, that does make sense. Like during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, they say the teenage young, like the 15-year-old, 16-year-old party cadres were the most venomous and ferocious and violent. They're fanatics. They're like Hitler Youth. They're just crazy.
Yes, they put the youth in Hitler Youth. There's a reason they had. There's a reason Hitler did not have the Hitler Middle Age movement, because at a certain point, you're just too tired, right? So if Hitler's out there
giving... Soccer moms are some of the most passionate and I would say venomous of the newbie woke 2.0. So Hitler didn't have like Hitler Youth, but he had Hitler Youth, but he didn't have Hitler soccer moms.
But do you know why? I'm gonna throw a theory at you, Carrie, and I'd like your take on my theory here. The reason some of those soccer moms, people in their, I would say, later 40s, early 50s, are so vicious is because they're stuck with kids all frickin' day, and it's made them insane, right? So they're stuck with the vicious kids. That's my theory. Carrie, what say you?
I don't know, because I don't have kids. I can't really make I don't know if that's what would do it. I tend to think because
Wait, what is
I don't have kids. I know a lot of women who don't have children who are also in that age range, though, who are very venomous about social justice. And sometimes I've thought that's because they tend to treat oppressed groups as children. I think it's Camille Paglia who talks about this, about sort of fulfilling that mothering, like that mama bear instinct with wanting to protect the oppressed or the marginalized, but taking it to this sort of toxic extreme where you're speaking on their behalf and you're turning over cars for them.
Well, now let me just, no, it makes perfect sense. Let me just throw out, we have a breaking headline, which is 24 Russian diplomats have been kicked out of D.C. This is the latest move of provocations by the Biden administration, and the Biden administration won't discuss it. But what they're saying is 24 Russian diplomats, because that's just what you want to do in the run-up to war. And by the way, they're undoubtedly going to blame this on Russia. So let me turn to that, because everyone's, of course, concerned about, Ted, I'm sure you remember the run-up to the Iraq War. I said this earlier. Does what you're seeing now remind you of the sort of hysteria run-up that we saw going into the Iraq War that we now realize was a bunch of hooey? But what do you think of what's going on with this war buildup, Ted?
Well, there's a lot of differences in terms of details and in terms of how certain everything is. And obviously, in this case, the U.S. is not the chief would-be protagonist, right? But there's a big similarity, which is what I call the whole, like, you never know thing, right? Like, well, you never know if Saddam Hussein kept his WMDs. You never know if he might still have had them in the first place. You never know if Scott Ritter was gone. You never know if he could use those WMDs and give them to al-Qaeda. You never know if al-Qaeda might. So there's this whole, like, all these rhetorical leaps of logic, like, well, it's all conditional tense. Like, well, if this happened and that happened and this happened, then that would really be bad. And I'm like, I think you could pretty much say that, about, like, anything. You could say that about killer bees or murder wasps or, if this, if that, then, we're all going to die. But and so you are seeing a similar thing. Well, I was talking to a conservative friend of mine earlier today, fellow cartoonist Scott Stantis, with whom I have a podcast. And, he's like, well, and I told him, I don't think Russia's going to invade Ukraine. And he's like, yeah, but they're massed on the border. And I'm like, so? It doesn't mean they're going to invade. Troops have been massed on many borders. Mostly, they don't invade. So there's that's similar.
Well, no, I agree 100%. And I think it's a very good point, Ted. But one thing we do know for sure, first off, I don't buy the Russians had troops massed at the border. As I pointed out, they were in Yelnya, over 100 miles away. But what I know for sure is that the Biden administration has kicked out 24 Russian diplomats and plans to deploy 1,000 troops to Eastern Europe. He put 8,500 on standby. And that NATO has been deploying troops all around Russia in other countries, like Poland, for instance. And this has been going on. So to me, the thing I know for sure, and I'll tell you something else I know for sure. For 4 years during the Trump administration, Russia and their leader, Vladimir Putin, was demonized every single day in the American media and by the Democrats specifically. Russia was demonized every single day in a way. So I agree with that. But I think if you reverse it and ask, what do we know that the U.S. has done? You know, to me, kicking out the diplomats just after we're saying what the U.S. is doing is being very two-faced. We're saying we're trying to negotiate and we want a peaceful resolution. We don't want a peaceful resolution. We want war. That's what I think. So, Carrie, any comments from you?
Actually, I was going to ask you, because I don't know enough about this. This is one of those areas where I always feel I don't have enough expertise to offer an opinion. So I was wondering, I believe we want war too. And I was a leftist when we went to war with Iraq, and I saw the lies they were peddling about yellow cake. I followed all of that at the time. I haven't been following this as closely, but my question for you is why? Like, why do you think forces push us, whether you want to call them deep state or just the military-industrial complex or whatever? Why are resources?
There are a variety of reasons, but the short version that I can give is that when Vladimir Putin took over in the 90s under Bill Clinton, Russia was ruled by oligarchs, people like a guy named Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who's the richest guy in Russia. And when Putin came in, the oligarchs put him in. They thought he was going to be another pushover leader, a puppet. Putin was his own person, and he went to the oligarchs and said, okay, I'm not going to take what you have, but stop trying to buy the government. And Khodorkovsky refused. Khodorkovsky got put in jail. Khodorkovsky, again, at one point the wealthiest guy in Russia, has connections. He was on the board of the Carlyle Group. He's close to Jacob Rothschild. He gave him the controlling shares. And when Putin had Khodorkovsky arrested, Khodorkovsky was plotting his revenge. And he's the guy who funded the Magnitsky Act. And so this goes back to that point. And anybody can look this up. 2005, 2006, look up Senate Resolution 322. And that's a resolution that's defending Mikhail Khodorkovsky. It had one Senate sponsor, a senator named Joe Biden. It had two co-sponsors, just two. A junior senator from Illinois named Barack Obama and a well-known Republican senator named John McCain. And what I'm saying is Khodorkovsky's been as clear as possible that he wants to take over for Putin. He hates Putin, is his enemy, and wants to get rid of him. And Khodorkovsky aligned with George Soros, who built the biggest NGO group, International Renaissance, in Ukraine. So there's way too much info, Carrie, but that makes some sense?
I took, a lot of notes, so we're good. I'm going to look all this up. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and what I tell people is don't take my word for any of it. Go look it up. And I would start with Senate Resolution 322, 2005. You'll see Biden, Obama, and McCain are the only sponsors on it. And you'll see Khodorkovsky and how to spell his name. Then start to look up Khodorkovsky. You'll see his connection. When I say connected to Jacob Rothschild, I mean, when he was put in jail, he gave the controlling shares of Yukos Oil, the company that he bought. And you can see that he was on the board of the Carlyle Group. And that's what Russiagate was about. And that's unfortunately what being obsessed with this stuff for the past 4 years has gotten me. Ted Rall, sorry to go off on tangent. Well, it's not a tangent. It's related, right?
It sort of is.
Yeah. And anyone look it up and check it out for yourself. Ted Rall, great appearance. Get well soon. Carrie, we're glad you're feeling better. Great job as co-host. We'll talk to Carrie or Carter next week on Unsafe Wednesdays, and we'll be back tomorrow on the Best Damn Talk Show. Thanks again to Tyler Nixon, too. In the world, it's the backstory.